Welcome to Washington Today for Friday, April 15th, 2022. I'm Nkoyo Iyamba. Here are some of today's headlines. More than 900 civilian bodies found in the Kyiv region. Ukrainian police report that bodies were abandoned in the streets or given temporary burials. Ukrainian police data show that 95% who died had died from gunshot wounds. Ukraine is embracing for retaliation after saying it destroyed the Moskva, that's the flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, and residents were warned not to rush back home. Bloomberg News is reporting that Moscow has not acknowledged a Ukrainian strike on the vessel. However, a U.S. defense official said it was hit by 2 Ukrainian cruise missiles. Michigan's Democrat Representative Rashida Tlaib denounced Israeli police's storming of Al-Aqsa Mosque during the holy month of Ramadan, calling the actions, quote, wrong and cruel. The Associated Press reports that early Friday, as thousands of worshippers were gathered at the holy site for morning prayers, Israeli police fired tear gas and stun grenades on the mosque compound and entered the building and arrested hundreds of Palestinians. Israeli authorities said young Palestinians had thrown rocks toward a gate leading to the Western Wall, a sacred Jewish prayer space. Palestinian witnesses, however, told the AP that a small group had thrown rocks at Israeli police, who then went on to attack the compound. COVID-19 cases are on the rise again in the U.S. That's according to the Associated Press that's reporting that the coming wave caused by a mutation called BA2 will wash across the nation. BA2 is reportedly about 30% more contagious. And President Biden is set to nominate Michael S. Barr, a law professor and a former Obama administration official, to be the Federal Reserve's vice chair for supervision. Previously, Mr. Barr faced pushback from progressives when his name was floated for a different position. The administration's initial nominee, Sarah Bloom Raskin, failed to win Senate confirmation. That's after Republicans took issue with her writing on climate-related financial oversight and seized on her limited answers about her private sector work. Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat of West Virginia, joined Republicans in deciding not to support her. We begin now in Washington, D.C., with the Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S., Oksana Markarova. In an interview with the Washington Post, Markarova gives an update on Ukrainian efforts to fight the Russian military.
Well, there is not a lot I can disclose at this stage. I'm sure after we win this war, there will be a lot of information and the details about every aspect of this war. But just want to repeat what our president says all the time, repeating the quote of another great man, that we will fight in the air, on the ground, in the sea. The Russian fleet is a very important part of the Russian offensive. It has been deadly on attacks on our Mariupol and Odessa and others. So, of course, Ukrainian armed forces will be fighting everywhere and will try to do everything possible and sometimes impossible in order to defend our country and in order to destroy the enemy equipment. And this has been a remarkable, very important equipment for the Russian armed forces, and I'm very glad that it will not be able to shoot at our peaceful cities anymore.
Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S., Oksana Markarova. 2 Republican senators, Senator Steve Daines of Montana and Ukrainian-American Representative Victoria Spartz of Indiana, became the first American lawmakers to travel to Ukraine this week in the aftermath of the Russian invasion. Here's Senator Steve Daines speaking on CNN.
There is going to be a war crimes trial with the ICC. It needs to happen, and Vladimir Putin needs to be held fully accountable for what he has done to the people of Ukraine.
Senator, it's Breonna Keeler, and I wanted to ask you about this new tranche of weapons that is being sent from the U.S. These next couple weeks could be really pivotal in whether Ukraine is able to push Russia back effectively enough. Are those weapons going to get here in time?
It's a real concern. I spoke with a number of Ukrainian leaders. I spoke with military leaders while I was there. If there was one message, it's this. The war crimes aren't going to end until the war ends. The humanitarian crisis is not going to end until the war ends. And the war is only going to end when the Ukrainians win this war against the Russians. And they're only going to win it if we can get this lethal aid to them in time. They've got a long list. They've prioritized it. It's heavy artillery. It's heavy armor. It's surface-to-air capabilities. But time is of the essence. They not only need it quickly, but they also need greater numbers. And so we've been communicating this certainly back to the administration and others in Washington, because there's a window of time that we have at this moment. They pulled out of northern Ukraine. They pulled out of that area that we saw visibly in Bucha, and they're now coming back to the south and the east. That is where this war is going to be won or lost.
Montana Republican Senator Steve Daines speaking on CNN. Meanwhile, Russia has warned the U.S. against further arming Ukraine. CBS News reports that Russia has sent a formal diplomatic note to the Biden administration with that warning. The Washington Post first reported the diplomatic note from Russia to the U.S. and quoted Russian officials as saying the weapons shipments could bring, quote, unpredictable consequences. For now, President Biden will not travel to Ukraine. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki quelled those rumors at a live audience appearance interview with Pod Save America.
All right, so I want to start with something that feels a bit newsy. Earlier today, after reports that the reports that you guys are considering sending a senior official to Ukraine, a reporter asked the president if he's ready to go to Ukraine himself. And I was watching this clip, and then he just said, yeah. I was like, oh, okay. Is sending the president to Ukraine something that you guys have like talked about? I know there's no plan. Like, is it something that you guys are discussing?
No.
Okay.
No.
So he's ready. He's just not like.
He is ready. He's ready for anything. The man likes a fast car, some aviators. He's ready to go to Ukraine. It's true. He does. We are not sending the president to Ukraine. What I will tell you is that what Boris Johnson did is he took, I believe, an 8-hour train through a war zone to get to the middle of Ukraine. So, no, that is not in the plans for the President of the United States. We should all be maybe relieved about that.
Good.
He's got a few other things to do.
I was going to say thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. You're welcome, America. We need him to do a lot of things.
You know what, Jen? My follow-up question was going to be like, all right, we all know what the risks of that would be. Like, what are the rewards?
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki speaking Thursday night in an interview with Pod Save America. As for military strategy, U.S. officials are skeptical of Russia's nuclear threats, but they aren't dismissing them completely. Here's CIA Director William Burns delivering a speech Thursday night at Georgia Tech in Atlanta.
4 big challenges will shape our future. The first is the immediate threat posed by renewed Russian aggression against Ukraine. The second is the longer-term problem posed by China's ambitious leadership, the single most important geopolitical challenge as far out as I can see into the 21st century. The third is the massive impact of technological change. And finally, the challenge of building a workforce drawn from the richness and diversity of American society. So let me describe how we're approaching each of those historic tasks. Much of my gray hair comes from dealing with Vladimir Putin's Russia. I was the U.S. ambassador in Moscow 15 years ago and have watched over the years as Putin has stewed in a combustible combination of grievance and ambition and insecurity. An apostle of payback, he is firmly convinced that the West, especially the United States, took advantage of Russia's moment of historical weakness in the 1990s. His risk appetite has grown as his grip on Russia has tightened. His circle of advisors has narrowed, and in that small circle, it has never been career-enhancing to question his judgment or his stubborn, almost mystical belief that his destiny is to restore Russia's sphere of influence. Every day, Putin demonstrates that declining powers can be at least as disruptive as rising ones. By early last fall, we and our partners in the U.S. intelligence community had begun to gather disturbing and detailed intelligence about Putin's plans for a major new invasion of Ukraine. Neither Putin nor many of those around him could imagine Russia as a major power without a deferential Ukraine, a Ukraine whose external choices were controlled by the Kremlin. I had learned over the years never to underestimate Putin's relentless determination, especially on Ukraine. In early November, President Biden asked me to travel to Russia to convey directly to Putin and several of his closest advisors the depth of our concern about his planning for war and the consequences for Russia of attempting to execute that plan. I was troubled by what I heard. While it did not yet seem that he had made an irreversible decision to invade Ukraine, Putin was defiantly leaning in that direction, apparently convinced that his window was closing for shaping Ukraine's orientation. He also seemed convinced that this winter offered a favorable landscape, with President Zelensky and the Ukrainians unlikely, in his view, to mount effective resistance, the Russian military capable of a quick, decisive victory at minimal cost, our European allies distracted by their own politics and risk-averse, and the Russian economy sanctions-proofed by a war chest of foreign currency reserves. When he launched his war 7 weeks ago, Putin was proven wrong on each of those counts. Ukraine, he had argued for years, was not a real country. But real countries fight back. And that's what Ukrainians have done with such remarkable bravery.
CIA Director William Burns also said that the U.S. should not ignore China.
A silent partner in Putin's aggression, Xi Jinping's China is our greatest challenge, in many ways the most profound test that CIA has ever faced. The People's Republic of China is a formidable competitor, lacking in neither ambition nor capability. It seeks to overtake us in literally every domain, from economic strength to military power and from space to cyberspace. Its rise has been remarkable. In 2001, before many of you in this room were born, that makes me feel really old, China was the top trading partner with 12 countries. Now it's the top partner with 120 countries. At the beginning of this century, China's GDP was $1 trillion. Now it's about $15 trillion. At the beginning of this century, around the time many of you were born, China was nowhere near what you would call a global leader in technology. Now it's a leader in AI, 5G, drones, hypersonics, and web applications, probably quite a few of which are on your phones right now. Of course, China's rise is not inherently a bad thing. Hundreds of millions of Chinese citizens have climbed out of poverty into the middle class, and Americans have also benefited economically from China's growth. But let's look at some other numbers. In the last few years, Beijing has hacked at least 150 U.S. companies to steal secrets. It is trying to increase its nuclear arsenal to 1,000 warheads. It has detained 1 million of its own citizens simply because they are Muslim, and arrested thousands more in Hong Kong for peacefully supporting democracy. And it has lured countless countries into crushing debt, data exposure, and democratic backsliding. The People's Republic of China is intent upon building the capabilities to bully its neighbors, replace the United States as the preeminent power in the Indo-Pacific, and chip away with other authoritarians at the rules-based international order that we and our allies have worked so hard to sustain. As an intelligence service, we have never had to deal with an adversary with more reach in more domains. At the same time, it's important to be clear that our concern is about the threat posed by the People's Republic of China, the PRC, not about the people of China, let alone fellow Americans of Chinese or Asian descent. It is a profound mistake to conflate the two. At CIA, we will stay sharply focused on the PRC challenge.
CIA Director William Burns speaking Thursday night at Georgia Tech in Atlanta. Wisconsin Republican Representative Mike Gallagher also spoke on the Russia-China relationship on Fox News.
Wisconsin Congressman Mike Gallagher is a member of the House Intelligence and Armed Services Committees. I know that you listen to Director Burns, and he doesn't speak very often. He gave a speech yesterday. He chose this topic and to say that China is a silent partner in the war against Ukraine. What did you make of him deciding to come out and say that now?
Well, I'm glad that he did, and Director Burns is right, except it isn't a silent partnership. Prior to the invasion of Ukraine, Xi and Putin signed a 5,000-word statement proclaiming a partnership without limits. So Putin is merely becoming Xi's sadistic sidekick in this new Cold War that they have launched against the West, and he will only grow more dependent on China the more he experiences setbacks in Ukraine. So the lesson for us is at least twofold. One, we need to recognize who we are dealing with, two brutal dictators that want to destroy the West. And secondly, we need to wean ourselves off of our addiction to cheap Chinese manufacturing. You know, Dana, we've been scratching our heads throughout the Ukraine crisis, wondering how the Europeans could have gotten themselves into a position where they're so dependent on Russia for basic energy resources. Well, we've done the same, except with different goods in terms of our dependency on China. So if we're to have a chance of winning this competition, we need to selectively decouple our economy from China before it's too late.
Wisconsin Republican Representative Mike Gallagher speaking on Fox News. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Hey, teachers and high school students. Tune in to Washington Journal Saturday, April 30th at 9 a.m. Eastern Time on C-SPAN and C-SPAN Radio. Join the C-SPAN education team and our special guests for our annual Cram for the Exam live call-in program. Review for the upcoming AP U.S. government exam, brush up on your knowledge of civics and the three branches of government, and share your questions with our expert hosts. You definitely do not want to miss this awesome experience. So grab some coffee or tea, a donut or a grapefruit, and find a comfy spot to engage with your friends at C-SPAN and ask your questions and give a shout out to your school. If you have questions, email us at educate@c-span.org.
Welcome back to Washington Today. Here are a few more headlines. Multiple Democratic pollsters are sounding the alarm about President Joe Biden's low approval ratings and how Democrats are entering dangerous political territory ahead of the midterm elections. Former Hillary Clinton pollster Mark Penn told Fox News that President Biden's numbers were, quote, spectacularly low approval numbers, which makes President Biden's reelection, quote, a virtual impossibility. Former head of the Environmental Protection Agency in the Trump administration, Scott Pruitt, plans to run for the seat being vacated by longtime Republican U.S. Senator Jim Inhofe. Pruitt stepped down as EPA administrator in 2018 amid a wave of ethics scandals and investigations, including living in a bargain-price Capitol Hill condo tied to an energy lobbyist, and investigations into pricey trips with first-class airline seats and unusual spending amounts for security. Astronomers have detected a powerful radio wave laser in space known as a megamaser. This record-breaking megamaser is the most distant one ever observed at 5 billion light years away from Earth. The light from this space laser traveled a whopping 36,000 billion miles to reach our planet. Twitter plans to stop Tesla CEO Elon Musk's proposal to buy the company and take it private. The social media company said Friday that its board of directors has unanimously adopted a, quote, poison pill defense in response to Elon Musk's proposal to take over the company. The move would allow existing Twitter shareholders, except for Elon Musk, to buy additional shares at a discount, thereby diluting Musk's stake in the company and making it harder for him to corral a majority of shareholders' votes in favor of the acquisition. Twitter's plans would take effect if Musk's roughly 9% stake grows to 15% or more. We begin in Iowa. The Iowa Supreme Court ruled that Democratic Senate candidate Abby Finkenauer qualifies for the primary ballot. The court rejected a lower court's ruling stating that 3 signatures from 2 counties were invalid, leaving Finkenauer without the required 100 signatures from at least 19 counties. If Finkenauer wins the June 7th primary, she'll face Republican Senator Chuck Grassley, who is seeking an 8th term in the Senate. We continue now in Georgia, where redistricting has turned 2 former political friends into political rivals. Both Representatives Lucy McBath and Carolyn Bordeaux flipped 2 longtime Republican congressional districts in Atlanta's northern suburbs by running against then-President Donald Trump. After new congressional maps approved by the Republican-controlled state legislature made Representative McBath's district more conservative, she decided to compete for Representative Bordeaux's seat. That's pitting 2 colleagues from the same party against one another ahead of Georgia's May 24th primary. And speaking of redistricting, the headline at WashingtonPost.com reads, Democrats' redistricting gains hit a roadblock, the Supreme Court, by Washington Post national political correspondent David Weigel. Well, David Weigel, in your article you wrote, Wisconsin Democrats thought they had won the redistricting war, but what happened?
Well, the Supreme Court happened, and to understand what's going on here, you have to wind your way through this network of state Supreme Courts, lower courts, a bunch of entities that Democrats who didn't do as well down ballot as they wanted to in 2020 have relied on to keep state maps from being too gerrymandered for Republicans. And so what happened with Wisconsin is that the state Supreme Court, which has a swing vote Republican on the majority, had held up the governor's version of maps that Democrats thought were a bit more fair for them. Republicans drew maps to lock in a gerrymander. The state was okay with a map that unwound some of them. It created more competitive seats. What happened was when Republicans appealed to the Supreme Court, something Democrats didn't take that seriously at first, Supreme Court reverted to the Republican map. And what you have around the country as Republicans look at the next 10 years is a confidence that this Supreme Court with the 6-3 majority is convincible if they get the right kind of case that says you should revisit these maps that local judges forced upon the state, and you should throw them out in favor of maps drawn by state legislatures. All of this is about getting the legal theory, which is not new, but has not been taken very seriously until recently, the theory that the Constitution's second article gives only state legislatures the ability, no one else, to draw maps, to set election rules. The idea is finding a case that gets before the Supreme Court that gets the justices to confirm that. That would unwind a lot of what Democrats were able to achieve in the redistricting processes this year. In a lot of cases where Republican legislators had one map, Democrats had another, and a court weighed in.
And what led to your research? In fact, I think some states are at risk of having the higher courts rule in favor of Democrats. Some states are at risk of having the higher court rule in favor of Democrats.
Right. It's very complicated, and it's fairly new. So this idea that the Constitution, Article 2, gives only state legislatures the power to firm up election rules, it has been around. It was cited by Rehnquist in Bush v. Gore, but it was not something that you saw a lot of cases brought on. What changed over the last year and a half is it's actually less about redistricting than about the 2020 election. You saw in Pennsylvania and in Arizona and a lot of the states where Republicans were suing to overturn the results. One argument they made, and Wisconsin too, one argument they made is other actors, state Supreme Court officials or local election officials, other actors changed the election rules, and only state legislatures can do that. They have not brought that successfully to court, but they found some conservative justices, the 3 most conservative members of the Supreme Court, do find that convincing. What happened recently, and Wisconsin is one example of Republicans who've seen, but what happened recently is Republicans in North Carolina were unhappy that a map drawn by the state legislature there, it's a state where there's a Democratic governor, but he's not allowed to veto the map. Republicans drew a very aggressive map that locked in, I think, just 3 Democratic seats in a pretty competitive state, almost a 3-1 advantage for Republican delegation. That was struck down by a Democratic Supreme Court. This is, Supreme Courts were elected in North Carolina. Democrats had a majority. Republicans in the state appealed to the Supreme Court to overturn that, and they cited this theory, this independent state legislative theory, saying that the Supreme Court in this state had no right to overturn what voters overturned. They did not succeed like Republicans did in Wisconsin. What they did find is that those 3 most conservative members of the court agreed with them. They just couldn't take the case. Brett Kavanaugh sounded sympathetic, but said it was too soon to the election. And you have in Amy Coney Barrett and John Roberts, the newest member of the court and the conservative who most frequently does vote with liberals. You have some speculation among conservatives that they can be convinced that this is true. Take that a few months down the line, maybe it's too late in the state like North Carolina to throw out the maps this year. But there is discussion among Republicans, and we quote some of them, about finding the right case to bring this in front of the Supreme Court and maybe overturn these maps for 2024, maybe get rid of them for the next decade of elections and really undo everything that Democrats were able to get out of the process.
So can we assume then that the justices will eventually rule on a standard on gerrymandering, or is this a wait-and-see situation?
It's wait and see, and what I think liberal attorneys will tell you, we talked to Mark Elias and a few other for this story, they don't think this argument makes a lot of sense. Legislatures can they don't think the argument makes a lot of sense that if the legislature acts, no one else can intervene. But they have seen the Supreme Court do things they didn't think it was going to do. They've seen arguments get adopted that they thought were just not convincing. And in the case of Wisconsin, you had the judges rule right before an election that the maps could be changed. There's something called the Purcell principle based on another Supreme Court precedent where some of the conservatives will say it's too close to the election, we're not going to intervene. In the Wisconsin case, they didn't intervene. And you have a lot of Democrats worried that this permutation of the Supreme Court will find some rationale to get right with what Republicans are saying, that if Republicans do find the right vehicle, they can convince 5 justices that it's time to let the legislature redraw the map. You also have Republicans, and I keep mentioning North Carolina and Wisconsin. These are states that have elected Supreme Court judges. Republicans are also planning to get more like-minded judges elected in those states as soon as this year, and then maybe go back to court. So then they might have a victory in the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court. They might have a victory in the U.S. Supreme Court. And if it sounds complicated, it is. I mean, there's a whole Calvin Ball labyrinthine process of how to get these maps passed. Man, as you and I are talking, there are 3 states that still have not finished the maps that people are going to be voting in November. That is unusual, and that's a combination of the chaos from the census being a little bit screwed up in 2020, both because of Donald Trump's intervention and because of the pandemic, and just this dragged out fight between Democrats and Republicans, bouncing from the legislature to the court to the Supreme Court, trying to find some advantage on the maps. What has changed in the last few weeks is that Democrats who had a very good run of victories at local courts are worried that Republicans will find new judges and new arguments and overturn these maps as soon as next year.
Democrats' redistricting gains hit a roadblock at the Supreme Court. By Washington Post national political correspondent David Weigel. Find that article at washingtonpost.com. Thank you very much for explaining this very complicated issue for us.
Thank you very much.
On this Friday, we have a convergence of religious holidays. The Muslims continue celebrating Ramadan, a month of fasting, praying, and reflection. Many Christians are observing Good Friday, commemorating the crucifixion of Jesus and his death at Calvary. And Friday also marks the beginning of a special time for many Jewish families around the world. It's Passover, which celebrates the Exodus, that is, the liberation of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. Vice President Kamala Harris and her husband, the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, spoke at an online Passover event.
We hope this event inspired you as much as it inspired us. And I now have the honor of doing one of my favorite things, and that's introducing my wife, our Vice President, Kamala Harris.
Well, thank you, Doug, the second gentleman of the United States. Greetings, everyone. Greetings. It is so good to be together. I want to thank, of course, our President, Joe Biden, for bringing us together. And to all the members of Congress who are with us, thank you as well for your leadership and your great work. And to everyone, thank you for making this evening possible. For countless generations, people have gathered around the Seder table to be reminded of the power of faith and of the resilience of the human spirit, to relive the journey from oppression to freedom, and to find comfort in this story of hope and redemption. This year, it is an honor to gather once again to celebrate this sacred holiday and to renew our shared commitment to fighting for all those who are not yet free. Tomorrow night, our family, like so many families in the United States and the State of Israel and around the world, will return to the Seder table. Doug and I will host a Seder at our home with some of our Jewish staff members, and we are both looking forward to it very much. As I told the President of Israel when I spoke with him earlier today, we believe it will be the first Passover Seder ever hosted at the Vice President's residence. Thank you all again for joining us, and from our family to yours, happy Passover. Thank you again. There's so much to think about in terms of the blessings we have all received. Happy Passover.
Happy Passover.
Next year in Jerusalem. Take care.
Vice President Kamala Harris speaking at an online Passover event. Major League Baseball celebrates Jackie Robinson Day on Friday, which is the 75th anniversary of the Dodgers legend breaking baseball's color barrier. Jackie Robinson was posthumously awarded a Congressional Gold Medal. This happened more than a half century after he broke baseball's color barrier. President George W. Bush, that is, gave Congress's highest honor to Robinson's widow, Rachel Robinson, in a ceremony in the Capitol Rotunda. Here's President George W. Bush from 2005.
I'm honored to be here to present the Congressional Gold Medal to Mrs. Robinson. It's a great tradition of our Congress to honor fantastic and noble Americans, and we're doing just the thing today with Jack Roosevelt Robinson. You know, he's a great ball player. Anybody who follows baseball knows how great he was. He's fantastic statistics, MVPs, all the big honors you could get, but his electricity was unbelievable. Think about this. This is a guy who inspired little 7-year-olds to dream of wearing 42 and dashing for home in Brooklyn, and a 7-year-old like me hoping to get his Topps baseball card, even though I was an avid Giants fan. He was an amazing guy, and his story was powerful then, and it is powerful today. His story is one that shows what one person can do to hold America to account to its founding promise of freedom and equality. It's a lesson for people coming up to see. One person can make a big difference in setting the tone of this country. He always fought for what he called first-class citizenship. It's an interesting phrase, isn't it? First-class citizenship, not second class, not third class, first-class citizenship for all. As John Kerry mentioned, it started in the Army. Obviously, it really manifested itself on the baseball field. After all, it was Branch Rickey who said he was looking for a man to cross the color line who could play baseball and had the character necessary to do so. Jackie Robinson had both, and that's why we're honoring him today.
That was President George W. Bush from 2005. And if you missed any of this program, you can find it at cspan.org/podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, if you'd like more on the stories that are shaping Washington, delivered daily right to your inbox, you can subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter, word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Nkoyo Iyamba. Thanks for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day we take your calls live on the air on the news of the day, and we discuss policy issues that impact you. Coming up Saturday morning, we talk about the Biden administration's effort to counteract inflation with Politico's Victoria Guida. Then Arizona State University's Joshua Sellers and Henry Thompson talk about their podcast, which aims to engage in divisive topics in a civil manner. Watch Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern, Saturday morning, on C-SPAN or on C-SPAN Now, our free mobile app. Join the conversation with your phone calls, Facebook comments, text messages, and tweets.